Coming up, as speculation continues to mount that the Houston Rockets indeed want to move the third overall pick in search of more veteran talent, do the Brooklyn Nets need to put Mikal Bridges on the table? Could another team steal Brooklyn's pick control as we wait for the draft later this month? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, while it may currently be a one-sided affair, it at least seems like the Houston Rockets are dead set on improving themselves this offseason and using the Brooklyn Nets pick one way or the other.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer set off something of a little bit of a mini Nets fandom firestorm yesterday when he reported that that the Houston Rockets were interested in trading the number 3 pick, that they had engaged with both the Memphis Grizzlies and the Brooklyn Nets, and O'Connor put out the name Mikal Bridges as being involved in those trade talks. He later amended the statement to basically say if they were to do that, then Mikal Bridges would have to be involved, but stop short of reporting that like it was on the table. So I don't think that Mikal Bridges is being actively shopped right now by the Brooklyn Nets in any shape or form. Also, it's very clear that Houston still is interested in moving this pick and doing some business here in the offseason, and that's going to be tied to the Nets in some fashion. So I don't think that part is going away. Do I think like a Mikal Bridges for picks trade is imminent? No, but it's for sure going to be a continued talking point of this offseason just because that's just sort of like the way it's shaping up. The Nets are just too tied to this thing considering it's their pick.
And the other part in this reporting seems to be the sense that Houston wants to improve their team on the court, right? When you hear about the speculation throughout this offseason, well, we'll give you back potentially Houston, your Brooklyn Nets picks for the future Phoenix picks. That's all well and good, and Houston could utilize them in different ways. However, that would speak more to liking their team currently, maybe making some margin moves and saying, we want value later down the road, and that could be palatable for Houston. This is, we need a player. We want to add another player into what we currently have. We want to take ourselves in the Western Conference and start to get into a conversation for a deep playoff run. And that's where then it feels like, okay, so Mikal Bridges would be the guy for Brooklyn if you want to get these picks back. And that feels like the farthest thing from what the Nets and what Sean Marks have indicated in terms of their strategy over the course of the last season and a half.
It makes sense that Houston would want to consolidate some of its assets at this point. I mean, they have the Nets picks. They have picks going out to OKC because that was part of like that swap for 2025. So they don't control everything, but they have picks. They have the Nets stuff. They also just have like a lot of young players that might be sort of redundant at this point. And if they're looking to consolidate sort of player assets into one better player that they know they can play all the time, like Bridges does make a lot of sense from that standpoint because you have like, Amin Thompson was starting near the end of the year but didn't start the whole season. They have Tariq and they have Cam Whitmore, and these guys all came off the bench. We know they were shopping Jalen Green at some point around the trade deadline. Like they have lots of guys who probably would get a lot more run on other teams, and the Rockets just don't even have the space sometimes, especially if Şengün comes back healthy. They don't have the space to just have enough minutes, basically.
Yeah.
So
now you're
at that point, what's that?
Now you're wasting the talent because they can't even find their way into these minute rules.
To some degree. And they have a coach in Ime who wants to win, and they have a team that probably on paper could be a playoff team if they consolidated and got another piece or two. So I get what the Rockets are doing here, and I also get why the Nets are going to be tied to this just because this is just sort of the state of the game at this point. The Nets gave away, they traded that pick. It spiked to 3. The Rockets have control over the 25 in the pick swap. And it's just going to be a continued talking point. It does not appear as if there's no sourcing that has said that the Nets have come anywhere close to doing this. So I want to be really clear about this. I know there's a certain contingent of Nets fans, and we talk about this a lot ourselves, about what a reset around getting the picks back in Bridges would look like. I think there's merit to it. We've talked about how there's merit to the other versions too. I think I don't see this as really totally black or white. But from the Nets point of view, if I were to guess, all this stuff is coming from Houston, right? Like, I don't think a single bit of this has come from the Nets. They've been mostly locked up for a while, outside of a couple like key people that I think have like pretty good inside stuff on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every time this comes out, it's Houston pressing down with a little bit of pressure to be like, hey, we're still thinking about this. What do we think? We would do this, and let's see how people react, almost like trial balloon status.
And I want to get into some of like the philosophy for Houston and how it impacts Brooklyn, obviously directly here. But then that's the other part of this of speaking to Memphis, right? So Memphis, who holds a top, what are they, 12th, 10th there in the draft? I'm going to make sure I double check what's position they have. Looking at Memphis and saying to me, to kind of support your theory on it all coming from Houston, it's, hey, we're thinking about making this move, and if we can do it, we'd love to get Mikal Bridges from Brooklyn. Now, if we can't, though, a pivot would just be maximizing the value of this third overall pick, where we don't really need this player. We already have this young talent. Maybe it's just a margin move down the draft board with a team like Memphis. Maybe it involves a veteran player from there or shifting some assets, whatever it may look like. But that would be the next phase of Houston, even if it's only them doing it, of their strategy of saying, well, if not you guys, we're going to do something here, because the third overall pick has more value than we currently need for what we're doing with our team in a perceived to be weaker draft class for 2024. If another team wants to come up and get themselves a player, we'll pivot to that. And I do find that interesting, just from the standpoint of the Brooklyn Nets are sitting there, and if they watch, I feel like I may have a bit of reaction to it. If I sit here and watch the Brooklyn Nets watch their third overall pick that is already conveyed to Houston, then get conveyed over to the Memphis Grizzlies, who pick 9th overall in the upcoming draft, it would just be another layer to this pick journey story that seemingly the Brooklyn Nets do not want to get involved in at this point.
Yeah, and I think that, like, to me, it's like sort of like overwhelmingly clear. Like, we've talked a lot about it because I think logistically it makes a lot of sense, and I think we'll continue talking about it because, again, logistically a story that you can really tell yourself about, like, why the Nets should walk down this path. I do have another point that I want to make about the NBA draft this season, something that's sort of like on a high level that we're starting to see emerge as like more and more reporting gets going, and as we get closer to the date, we'll get it back into that here in a second. First, let you know this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, we're all carrying around different stressors in our life. Sometimes the big stuff, sometimes the small stuff, sometimes just the kind of stuff that just wakes you up in the middle of the night. You're not even sure what it is, but you know it's something that's weighing on you. When we keep this stuff bottled up, it's going to start to affect us negatively. That's why therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest. Figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. Look, if you benefited from therapy before, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't gone in the past, it's time to start going right here in the future. This is where BetterHelp wants to step in and really work with you and for you. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, totally flexible, suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist. You're going to switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. BetterHelp is here to work with you, folks. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, looking at the Houston Rockets, their offseason, let's call it, strategy moving towards the draft. I do have a theory around what Houston's trying to accomplish, but you were mentioning about this upcoming NBA draft perceived to be a weak class, but maybe there's a shifting narrative here as we approach it later this month.
Well, yeah, the narrative is just that every team seems to want to trade its pick. We haven't heard. We've heard. I mean, I can't even run through the list, but I feel like at least half the teams in the draft have signaled in some way that they're interested in trading their pick. Now, at some point, there's just not enough places to trade them. If everyone wants to trade the pick, like, where are the picks going? So
I'll trade you pick 5 for pick 7. Thank you. I think this worked out really well.
And this is what happens when there's like sort of no definitive hierarchy to a draft, which is one of the reasons the draft is considered weak. It's not so much that there's no NBA players in it. It's that there's no clear consensus like top 3 or top 4 or 5, right? Which we find sometimes in a draft. Like, even going back to last year, it was pretty clear who the top 5 were going to be, right?
Yeah.
There was a little question around like the Miller Scoot thing at 2-3 for a little bit, but for the most part, it was Wembanyama, Miller, Scoot, the Thompson twins. I mean, like that was pretty much the story here. And this draft just doesn't have it. There are going to be players that emerge from this draft that are NBA players. Like that is clear. Like just like that's not a hot take. But because there's no clear hierarchy and there's so many teams that see their window as winning now, where like a draft doesn't really help them that much, this is it's 2 compounding factors.
Yeah.
Not a crazy lot of top 10 top overall talent, top tier talent, and teams that are just like, I don't know, aren't that interested in developing a player right now if they could have another guy who could actually get on the court and play playoff minutes for them, which outside of Derek Lively doesn't really usually happen with rookies, right? So I think these are the kind of things that are sort of happening within this draft and why things are starting to shake out this way.
Yeah, and that's you mentioned there about teams that are competing. We talked about this over the course of these NBA playoffs, right? How competitive the West especially has been. So now, combining with a weak draft class, everyone goes, we need a veteran. And we talked about this with Dorian Finney-Smith. Yeah, sure, there's young guys, Derek Lively, they can all of a sudden emerge and you can develop them in season. They can become contributors. But the holding premise for most NBA teams is I want experienced players that I understand their defined roles, know what they're going to be for us, and let's go ahead and try to move these assets in another direction. I do find it so I find that part interesting, bringing it back to Houston and how it ties to Brooklyn, because then again, it's this idea of, well, we want Mikal Bridges from you, Brooklyn. I actually think that Houston has been pretty narrowly focused on Mikal Bridges and thinking that he would be the ideal player to add into their rotation. But now the perceived value of the 3rd overall pick and even your picks going out forward, I just wonder if Houston looks at it as, if we can go get our guy, let's say that it is Mikal Bridges, fantastic. Is some of this posturing by them around a weak draft class and saying, we do have all these young guys, and maybe it is another couple years away, but how far are you from saying, well, Fred VanVleet, what does he look like for us? Are we going to be competitive in the West over the next couple of seasons? There's a world where Houston does kind of the smart thing, or should do the smart thing, develop their young players in the background a little bit, even if they lose some minutes, and then pick their spots along the way, rather than feel like they have to force their hand here around this draft. It may be the weak class that makes them feel like they want to try to squeeze value out of a pick that maybe does not hold that much weight around the NBA right now.
Well, they also, I agree with that. And they're also tied so specifically to the Nets with the pick, right? I think that I think if they had another team's pick, right, and there was another team sort of like in a similar situation, I can't even think of like what a good example of this would be, but like, okay, let's say they had like okay, let me put it a different way. Let's say they had like Washington's pick.
I was about to say, right? Washington would be a good one because they're always bad.
Let's say they had Washington's pick, and they'd be like, hey, you know what makes sense? Kuzma for the 3rd pick or something like that, right? I think we would hear it. Yeah. I think we would hear it phrased. I think it is Bridges for sure, but it's also that like it just happens to be the Nets pick, right? And the Nets can like be incentivized to maybe like take other picks back too or something like that and like go in a different direction with their team.
Yeah.
So I think that like it is that Bridges fits well, and it's a testament to Bridges. Like Bridges is still a very good player. Bridges can play on a championship level team for sure, right? And I know he's taken a hit here in like the fans' eyes because we agree. I think he was miscast here for an entire season. He still has a ton of value around the league. The contract's awesome. He's really good, and any team in the league would trade for him right now if they could, for sure. Like because he just doesn't make any money, and he's really good. And you can stick him in there in the playoffs, and he's going to play. Like that is not. I think people forget that a little bit. Right? Like I think we saw a season of him where it just didn't work out that well. And if he was the 3rd option on a team, any playoff team would trade for him, I believe. But I just think the Houston and Brooklyn thing is tied. It's not so much more. It's more just about that these two teams have done business in the past and these things are tied to each other. Probably a little less about Bridges, but it just happens to be the case.
Well, I was going to say, too, because there is a little bit of that, as you mentioned, with Mikal Bridges not having a great season and not being in a great spot with Brooklyn. There's also a part of like kind of a devalued asset, right? Well, is Bridges really that strong of a player, or does he still have the same value he did a year ago? I believe, to your point, that any team would want Mikal Bridges on their roster. However, with Houston and saying, and we have your picks here. You want 24? You want 24 right now? Great. You want 25 back? You want 26 back? Like, we can offer you, as you say, all the control of your own capital going forward here. The weird thing to me is, like, what would the we can talk about it maybe to close out the episode. It's about what the offer would have to be to move this needle here at all for the Brooklyn Nets. And I did have a different direction to take it beyond saying just your own pick control. Because remember, the version of this where Houston is trying to drum up business and they can't quite get there, well, maybe that then again puts the Nets back in a power seat beyond getting their own pick control and saying, okay, you don't want to draft in this. Okay, you want the player. Yes, it makes the most sense for us. But if nobody else is knocking down your door, or if no one else is intrigued by the Brooklyn Nets draft picks and saying, oh, we can get control of some of their capital and watch them from afar, it could be enticing. But if not, then Sean Marks, I wonder if he can end up in a spot like with Phoenix to a lower level and Kevin Durant. Hey, you really want to maximize the value here? You really like Mikal Bridges for all the reasons we talk about? Okay, we're going to want it all back, and we're not giving anything away here. We'll give you Mikal Bridges, but we're not giving any Phoenix picks thrown in here. We're not doing combined pick swaps of any kind. This is just you get Mikal, and we get 24, 25, maybe you're 25 because it's such a great class, right? Like, we really start to drive a hard bargain here. The difficulty there for the Nets is once you signal something like that, that's when the wheels of motion come and everyone starts to speculate the Nets are willing to move Mikal Bridges. They've done a really good job to this point of saying, we're not trading him. We're not interested in trading him. We're not talking. We're not taking calls. We're not fielding offers, right? Like, that has been a part of their credo ever since they traded for him in the Kevin Durant move.
And I think that'll be the credo either to when they don't trade him or right up to the second that they do. Like, I don't think they will never pivot from that stance, right? They will never pivot correctly, by the way, never pivot from he's our guy. We're sticking with him. This is not the plan is not to trade him, short of like being overwhelmed in a trade offer. I think that like trade offer does exist. I'll throw one out here in a second.
Yes.
That just like highlights maybe what would get the Nets actually thinking about it. And it's also going to highlight why Houston wouldn't ever even throw it out. We'll get to that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL as well. FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own right now. New customers going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150. You bet on spreads. You bet on money lines, player props, so much more. I like Dallas plus 6.5 going into this first game in Boston. Now, I think Boston takes the series. You can't. Sometimes you can parlay these things together on FanDuel. This one you can't exactly, but I like Dallas taking it plus 6.5 in this first game. Boston maybe just comes out a little slow around snaps, but I ultimately think that Boston wins the series. I'll go look into that and so much more over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. You're going to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the speculation, the reporting that, yes, Houston continues to want something for the Brooklyn Nets picks, whether it's with Brooklyn, whether it's talking with Memphis. Safeguarding against that might make things a little bit more interesting if that pick is ultimately going to get traded. When we look inside Houston, though, and talk about the trade scenario that would be the one that Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets cannot deny, I'm assuming, Doug, that you're going to talk about multiple young players as well as a lot of their picks back in an operation that sends Bridges to Houston.
Yeah, it's just going to be all the picks back, right? And all the picks in control back from them. Plus, I mean, like Dylan Brooks probably because you needed to like make some money work or something like that. And then like Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore or something like that, right? And it starts to sound ridiculous if you're a Houston fan because you're like, wait, hold on, we're giving up all this plus this, and it's like, yeah, it is ridiculous. But I'm trying to highlight what it would take for the Nets to even perk their ears up. I don't believe that, like, just clearly the number 3 pick is not going to do it for Bridges, right? I don't even think all the pick control would do it for Bridges at this point, right? But with the idea that you need to make the money work, I don't think even that would do it. I think that they're just too tied to him. They like him too much. He's the face of the Durant trade. He, is by all accounts a great dude, right?
Yes.
Which counts for a lot. And he's sort of like the anti Kyrie and KD thing that they had, which was like, you just couldn't really figure out like who was leading the team, like all this other stuff, right? All this other stuff that like happened.
All the good narratives are coming out with Mikal Bridges as one of your focal points.
I'm not even putting Katie and Kyrie down. I'm just saying that like and Harden too. Like there was just a lot of bad press that came out during these times. Like a lot of bad, weird quotes, just a lot of different stuff. Bridges just like doesn't like that. He's non-controversial. He's on a good contract. He's a really good player. He was the guy they got for Durant, and they would have to be completely overwhelmed. So when I start like saying this crazy trade, I know people will come in and say, well, Houston would never do it. Yeah, no crap. That's what I mean. Like that. What I mean is, it just doesn't. I don't think it actually really exists. I don't think the net between Houston giving up too much and the Nets probably overvaluing what Bridges is at this point for a lot of reasons that make sense. I just don't think the trade exists, and it would have to look something like that. And I don't think that ever gets offered.
Yeah, I mean, and they don't have to, just from like a money matching standpoint. Like they don't need to include Dylan Brooks to get something like this done. You mentioned with him making $22.2 million. There's enough players on the Houston.
I just threw it, by the way. Sorry, I just threw him in there because like the money was 1-for-1 on Bridges.
Yeah. No, right. And I know, like, mostly just around when we talk about some of these younger players. I think to your point, like I think the real needle mover. So, and the reason why I say that is because you have a player, you know, when you look at Jalen Green's making 12.4, you look at Thompson, he's making $9.2 million. That right there alone makes the money work for a trade like this. So if you're Brooklyn, again, if you're thinking about, well, if we're going to move Mikal Bridges, we're going to then pivot fully into our youth development and really moving forward. You assume Cam Johnson, that gets shopped in the veterans. So you say, I want every young player that I can comprise into this deal, along with my picks back, gives me the best chance to say, now I have, 13 guys on my roster, all under the age of 25, and I just see who comes to the top of this over the next couple of seasons, right? And by the way, keeps them bad maybe in the short term. Yeah.
The deal that I threw out, by the way, gets you like Embiid. Or like, or Giannis, or someone like this next group.
All of your young first rounders, 4 first-round picks,
or like Donovan Mitchell, or something
an elite number 3-ish player for your team.
Just someone way better, like even like Mitchell, Giannis, Embiid, like these guys. I mean, I'm not putting them all in the same class. I'm just saying that these guys, if you were putting massive trade packages together, the one I just highlighted gets you someone way better than Bridges. And so this is that's just mostly what I mean. That like it would take so much more. And if you're going to shop that package, you might as well just go to like an actual total 1A superstar and see if it gets it done for him. Right. Rather than stopping at Bridges.
Which makes it interesting. Yeah. Does Houston continue to put things onto the table for the Brooklyn Nets until they get to a place where they go, well, we should at least look around the league here and see what else we can get for this insane package.
And they might be doing that. And they'd be smart to do that. Like they probably have a trade package to actually go after one of these like superstar level dudes between the Nets picks and the players they have.
It's like, by the way, saying like we believe that Donovan Mitchell is staying put in Cleveland. Be like, well, maybe we'll just go call about Donovan Mitchell first here before we go all in on Mikal Bridges for all this. Maybe we just see if Cleveland's interested in making a move. Like
that would get you Mitchell and something else, probably, right? And so like it's just that this is what I mean. It's like it's almost laughable.
Now the other part of this, when they mentioned Memphis in this mix here, I'll tie them into the Brooklyn Nets because it had been speculated, I think, going back over the last couple of seasons that they were in the mix. One, obviously, we know with Mikal Bridges and wanting him, but they're an interesting team when you think about it in this context of, so would they trade up to get a young player? Does Memphis feel like they're maybe a little bit, further away from the pack? They had injuries a year ago, obviously, but where does their team currently stand and what are their expectations? This is where I just wondered about getting into the Dorian Finney-Smith of it all and where this fits in. Like the high level is all the picks and all the young players and let's wheel and deal. And then the other version of it is when they call, Houston calls Brooklyn. Brooklyn goes, we also have a veteran in Dorian Finney-Smith. If you just want a player, we can just talk about a reasonable asset, maybe one of our first round picks back, later in the draft. Same thing for Memphis. If they made the trade, Houston with Memphis, 3 for 9. I turn around, I still call Houston, or I call Memphis right now and say, hey, 9th overall pick in apparently a draft class that nobody wants to take a player in. Maybe the Nets can maximize the Dorian Finney-Smith value, something that feels like Sean Marks was a step behind on here over the last season and a half. Maybe they reclaim a little bit of it. It's not going to be perceived to be as valuable of an asset, but as we know, there are going to be NBA players taken in this draft, and if the Nets could get into the top 10 through one of these avenues, it'd certainly be worth doing.
Yeah, for sure. No matter what path they explore, they have to continually be trying to get young players any chance they get because, like, they need to be set up financially, and they need to just have cheaper guys on the roster just because especially if they're going after a big contract, you extend Bridges, like they're going to need savings wherever they extend Thomas. Like they're going to sign probably Claxton. Like it's gonna be a lot of money on the books, even with Simmons coming off.
Yeah.
So they need to try, if they can get Dorian Finney-Smith into a rookie scale contract, like they have to go for that. They have to pretty much, I think.
But by the way, no, one other thought about this is specifically with Dorian Finney-Smith. You mentioned about getting young players. Short of maybe the 3rd overall pick from Houston, do you value, because I think I know that I do, I probably value getting a young player back 1-for-1 for Dorian Finney-Smith than I do maybe getting any pick here in the 2024 draft specifically. Like in this year's draft class, if I can get a young player, a guy still on a rookie contract that just doesn't find the minutes, right, that gets buried somewhere, I think I'd rather get a player that you at least have some sample size on to know about, rather than a little bit of the, well, could be. And maybe that's short of saying there's an 18, 19-year-old kid that I really think over 2-3 years can develop. If I can get a 22, 23-year-old for Dorian Finney-Smith straight up in lieu of a 2024 pick, I'm pretty sure I would go that route, short of having, the list in front of me right now of teams that have players like that.
Yeah, I think the problem is the last thing you said is that that list is, what's that list? It's like if you're 22 and 23 and have shown anything in the NBA, I don't know why you're getting traded for Dorian Finney-Smith. Like it's easier to trade draft picks.
Yes, because
people forget. Like let's say like the Nets, like they wouldn't do this, but like let's say they were like, okay, let's go for Jalen Hood-Schifino, right? Like draft,
right.
didn't really play this year with the Lakers, didn't play. Okay, well, even that, fans be like, well, he didn't show anything, so what are we doing here? 2, it's like the Lakers might be hesitant to do it because it's like a name that you can attach to maybe a miss in a trade by trading the guy. Whereas like if you just trade the draft pick, everyone kind of forgets, mostly, like especially drafting in like the teens or whatever, like everyone just kind of forgets that like that you were the team that passed it on. So I think more of the problem is that 22, 23-year-old who's shown anything at the NBA level. Right, like I don't know, like Jaime Jaquez. I'm just like throwing out names.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, okay, well, the Heat would never do it. Right. So that's the problem you more run into around guys like that. So I think that's where the draft is easier because everyone sort of
course
gets away clean. The team doesn't have to attach the guy's name to the trade. It's just the pick, and everyone kind of forgets.
And from a Brooklyn standpoint, also, you also probably, it's funny. You get to say it was Jalen Hood-Schifino. Like you mentioned, fan base goes, okay, so let's see. He's got to show something here immediately right now. Or 2024 first round pick, they go, so we'll see. Give us a couple of years to see how that pans out.
It's all about managing expectations. Expectations are much easier to manage when it's just a nameless draft pick, which again, because it's hilarious when you look back. We'll get out of here, but it's hilarious when you look back at draft histories because sometimes it's just totally impossible to figure out like who drafted where because the pick appears as another team, but it was another team that drafted it because of the way the picks conveyed and get traded. So it like looks like it's one team drafting, but it's another. My whole point here is that it's just tracing back the lineage of how players got onto their teams through the draft. It's Charlie in the mailroom in Always Sunny. Like you just good luck, right? Sometimes, but that's why it's much easier to trade the picks because no one's going to do the forensic accounting that it takes to go back and figure out all the stuff that it takes to figure out
actually unraveled in the background. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated. We're almost, maybe by the time this episode posts, we get 7,000 YouTube followers. If we are not, go over to YouTube. If you have not subscribed, be the 7,000th follower and subscriber over on Locked On Nets YouTube. Again, you might be a little late to the party because there's some chance you hear this and it's already there. Sure. Don't be that person. Go over there. And by the way, if it's over 7,000, be 7,006 or whatever. That works also. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
Every one of our subscribers is like a little cherub to us. We love every single one of them equally. Now, we're overpaying for him, but he's worth it. And that is Sammy Goodwin.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.